Hello and welcome to today's Tiger webinar. I'm Lydia Palmer from RIT's Division of Development and Alumni Relations, and I'm your moderator for today's event. We're happy to have you join us today, and we hope that you and our entire Tiger family are well. As we all continue to adapt to this new working environment, we want you to know that RIT's Office of Alumni Relations is available to help everyone with a variety of needs, including new virtual content, learning opportunities, and networking and career assistance through this new normal of pandemic reality. If you're not already connected to the RIT Alumni Association social media channels, including Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, we encourage you to follow these accounts. You will find up-to-date communications and opportunities to connect to other Tiger alumni in your region and your industry through Alumni Association social media. Those links can be found in the chat box, and the chat box can be opened by clicking on the chat tab at the right of your webinar window. Many in the RIT family have asked how they can help our students and the university as we respond to the pandemic and prepare for the fall semester. We are incredibly grateful for those offers. There are two ways that you can help. First, our new graduates and current students are seeking positions for full-time careers and co-ops, respectively. Many of these positions have been delayed or canceled entirely. If your company is hiring or would consider adding a co-op post, please contact Chris Steeler in RIT's Career Services Office and allow her to post that position in our systems. In addition, there is now an unprecedented need for financial aid scholarships for continuing and incoming Tiger students. If you are able, please make a gift at the link in the chat box, and we thank you very much. Now, just a few housekeeping points. We want to ensure that everyone is familiar with the presentation tools. If you are joining from a remote location and are currently signed into your company's VPN, we encourage you to close that channel during the webinar to increase the quality of the transmission. The webinar platform is secure without VPN. All attendees have joined in mute mode. However, your questions can be entered in the chat box at any time throughout the discussion. We'll make every effort to address all your comments and questions throughout the webinar. You are joining the event using broadcast audio. If you wish to dial in by phone, dial-in information is provided in the chat box. Live captioning is also being provided, and you can find the link to access that in the chat box as well. This webinar will be recorded and made available, complete with captions, in approximately 1 week following today's event. All participants will receive an email with the link to the recording. If you have any technical questions, please feel free to type those into the chat box as well, and we will do our best to get you the appropriate answers. And now on to our webinar, Changes in the Information Security Threat Landscape and an Attack Surface Due to COVID-19. We are so pleased to welcome two-time alumnus, Caleb Barlow. Caleb is President and Chief Executive Officer of CynergisTek. Did I get that right, Caleb?
You did.
All right, a top-ranked information security and privacy consulting firm focused on the healthcare IT industry. Prior to joining CynergisTek, Caleb led the IBM X-Force Threat Intelligence Organization. In 2016, he built X-Force Command, part of a $200 million investment in global incident response services. In 2018, he created the Cyber Tactical Operations Center, which is a first-of-its-kind training, simulation, and security operations center on wheels. And RIT was lucky enough to host Caleb and the IBM Cyber Tactical Operations Center truck in November of 2018, something that we still talk about on campus today. Caleb has led technical teams in product development, product management, strategy, marketing, and cloud service delivery. He has also led the integration efforts of multiple IBM acquisitions. He is a sought-after speaker on the subject of security, appearing on the TED stage, the Today Show, and he regularly appears on national news broadcasts. Caleb's views have appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, USA Today, New York Times, and dozens of other publications. He testified before the U.S. Congress and the United Nations by invitation of the President of the UN General Assembly. Caleb also holds multiple patents in the field of unified communication. This is a critical discussion topic in the world of tech today. I know we all follow this topic pretty closely, being so integrated into IT communications as we are during this pandemic. So knowing that the situation is made more difficult in the country and the world that we're facing right now, we're looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So Caleb, our audience is all yours.
All right. Well, welcome, Tigers. And I understand it's actually good weather today in Rochester. So I'm going to talk. If you're listening to this on a mobile device, feel free to put in some earbuds and go take a walk while I talk. I'm not going to use slides. And let's face it, if it's sunny weather in Rochester, you need to take advantage of that while you can. So look, I come from the background of a security professional. And what I want to talk a little bit about is give you some insights into what's going on in the world of the bad guys as they too deal with COVID-19. And I think at this stage, I think we're all familiar with the impact that COVID-19 can have on our daily lives. It starts with a healthcare pandemic that drives a quarantine, that drives a financial crisis, the likes of which we probably haven't seen in 3 generations. And different industries are feeling the crisis in totally different ways. If we think of retail, travel, and entertainment, they're for the most part shut down. But other industries like healthcare are feeling this crisis in totally different ways. My company spends a lot of time working in the healthcare space, and in the same hospital, you might have beds in the ICU totally overrun with COVID-19 patients, but the halt in elective procedures is causing a financial crisis, as a lot of smaller and regional hospitals are unlikely to emerge as they're literally becoming insolvent because they can't do elective procedures. So, as an example, in healthcare, the crisis is driving demand, but not the kind of demand that generates money and profit. But what about the bad guys? Like, what impact does this have on their industry? And remember, cybercrime, and this is an unbelievable statistic, and I actually think this is probably underestimated right now. It's estimated to be a $1.5 trillion industry. So has it shut down? Has it been impacted? Well, oh, yes, it has. And the first thing to remember is that travel, entertainment, retail, and education were all major targets for adversarial activity, both nation state as well as organized crime. But they're all shut down. So it's not like a closed retailer is going to pay a ransom if their systems get locked up. And also remember, this pandemic is global in nature. So the bad guys, well, they're people. They're humans on the other end. They might work in teams, but they've likely been quarantined along with the rest of us. And they too are moving to a work from home environment. Now, think about this for a second. Just like the rest of us, getting set up at home with a home office is not trivial. Well, hacking from home requires several steps you may not have thought of. Not only do you need to find a quiet place to work and concentrate away from the family, but you've also got to ensure that your equipment and your internet connection are untraceable. And that's not trivial to set up, especially if you're a nation state actor, right? All of those folks likely had to go remote as well. And I see these impacts on the adversary in really 2 key ways. First, who you're going to target, what is often referred to as the threat landscape. Now, historically, the most likely to be attacked industries were financial services, manufacturing, and really only in the last 18 to 24 months before COVID, travel really emerged and recently accelerated to the top of the pack as nation state actors realized that understanding the travel patterns of individuals could reveal an awful lot about their habits, their employment, their religion, and the like. But this threat landscape has totally changed. And what I mean by this is the actor, their campaign, and their motivation, all of it's changed. And again, we've got to remember the adversary's human. Some of their past targets are now less lucrative. I mean, again, there's no point in targeting an airline, travel, or hotels as no one's traveling right now. Retail targets, again, less interesting, unless maybe you're targeting an online retailer. And education doesn't make a whole lot of sense as no one's in school. So remember, just like the economy's changed for all of us, it's also changed for the adversary. They've got to make money in new places and new industries. Healthcare, other industries involved in the COVID-19 response are now much more likely targets. And we see this in the growth in reconnaissance, phishing, attempted attacks in these industries. The point being, just like any business, the business of cyber criminals have also pivoted to a new normal. And by the way, this isn't just limited to cyber activity. There's also a lot of concern about kinetic activity. If I think of various actions that someone might take to, push a campaign or to, bring an impact around a political cause, again, where did people historically target in various types of kinetic activities? You targeted travel a lot, whether that would be someone, placing an incendiary device or some sort of disruption. Well, travel's not going to matter. You're, not that this was ever a good thing, but you're not going to see people shooting at a school right now because the schools aren't in sessions. So what does this mean, though? It doesn't mean that whatever angst was causing that activity, whether cyber or kinetic, has gone away. What it means is that targets have likely changed. And that's what we really have to think about as security professionals. Now, the second likely impact on the cyber side is more of a theory. And in fairness, this is a theory that's probably going to be very difficult to prove, but I still think it's worth mentioning. It's something I'm talking about with a lot of my peers. I call this the rise of the hobbyist hacker. Now, there are professionals and hobbyists in this industry just like any other industry. And the hobbyist hacker typically had a full-time job and only broke into things on the side for extra money or for fun, or as they like to call it, for the lulz. Now, let's say they lose their primary job as part of the COVID-19 slowdown. All of a sudden, breaking into things, the hobby now becomes the career. But there's a problem. Now you've got a lesser skilled individual in the same dark web forums, buying the same tools, executing the same types of attacks as the professional, but without that same level of expertise. And this can be really problematic for this criminal ecosystem as it introduces new actors in the mix that aren't necessarily following the same rules of engagement. So part of what makes this industry work is the unwritten norms of how the bad guys engage. Remember, they work as teams, loosely connected bad guys. They probably don't actually know who each other is, but they have to collaborate a lot. And if, for example, bad guys don't unlock systems, if people pay a ransom, then it's going to quickly kill that industry. So having more hobbyists in the mix can also drive up the cost of commodity tools and services that they use to mount their attacks, things such as phishing kits. And there's a lot of evidence that the cost of these tools has really been driven up over the last number of months. It's a classic case of supply and demand. The more demand due to the hobbyist hackers, and the more costly some of these tools are going to be, but also the disruption that's going to occur in these forums. Now, the other concern, if you're a ne'er-do-well in this ecosystem, is staying clear of law enforcement and intelligence agencies. And with more non-professionals in the mix, the likelihood that someone accidentally burns a forum, exposes tools, or gets into trouble only goes up. And that causes disruption for the entire ecosystem. So my point in raising all this is, remember, first and foremost, the bad guys have been disrupted just like the rest of us. Now, as I talk here, feel free to ask questions along the way in the question form you've got. I will pause along the way to ask questions. It's always much more fun for me if these things can be interactive. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is the attack surface. Now, think of the attack surface as an inventory of all the vulnerabilities an attacker can use to exploit your organization. The larger the attack surface, the greater likelihood that they're going to get in. And also keep in mind, as a defender, you need to block all the points of egress into your environment. As an attacker, you only need to find one way in. So that attack surface has permanently changed because of this crisis. And let's talk a little bit about how that's changed. So let me give you a little bit of a metaphor, and I will follow my sword here. I hate it when security guys use like medieval castles as metaphors, but I'm going to do it anyway because it fits. So think of a medieval castle, right? So this was your company before COVID-19. You got a big moat, a drawbridge. The jewels are locked up in the tower along with the princess. There's archers on the walls. And look, you even spent the extra money. You put some alligators in the moat, right? Now, for someone to get in, you're going to have to go through multiple layers of defense, right? You're going to have to get across that moat with the alligators. You're going to have to get past the archers. You're going to have to climb the wall. You're going to have to get the tower. You're going to have to climb up the tower, get the princess and the jewels. You get the idea. Well, what happened with COVID-19? We basically told everybody to get out of the castle, vacate the castle. We told all the villagers to run out in the forest, take the jewels with you, run out there, get out of the castle, social distance, work from home. So what does this mean? Well, it means everyone's now defending themselves. And it makes it a whole lot easier for a bad guy to get into a company by going after the same individuals, but now they're working from home. And oh, by the way, in a rush to vacate that castle, we left the drawbridge down. Remember, we did this in a hurry. That workstation your employee's using was never sanctioned by your company. It's a shared workstation their kids are playing Fortnite on in the evening. The VPN you're using was probably poorly configured and no one really understands how or where it terminates, let alone there's probably no logging coming off of that VPN termination. The home router's chock full of vulnerabilities because you bought it 5 years ago and you don't even realize it, but your home router's Bitcoin mining on the side and hasn't probably been updated since you purchased it. The point here is that by hastily moving to a work from home environment, we've opened ourselves up to a variety of new vulnerabilities, making it so much easier for the adversary. And keep in mind, these changes, well, they're semi-permanent. You know, go back to that castle metaphor. If you were worried about people climbing the castle wall, you dug a moat, increased the height of the wall, put archers on the wall. This change in the attack surface is, once again, the equivalent of evacuating the castle. Those defenses you've invested tons of time and money in, you know, you've bought all these tools, they're not going to do you any good. You need to send your knights, metaphorically speaking, into the forest. And that means we need to rethink about our security posture and completely relook at our security plans to address this new attack surface. Because let's face it, work from home, we're never getting that genie back in the bottle. You're going to need to protect the endpoint and the home network, something enterprises have typically completely ignored. So what does this bring us to? Well, it brings us to a new level of cyber hygiene. And what you need to consider moving forward, first of all, a lot of companies have done some level of security assessment. In some industries, it's required. Some industries, it's suggested. If you've never had a security assessment at your company, get one, and get one done now in a post-COVID world. If you have had one done, now is the time to rerun it and really understand the delta of what happened in the world and get some recommendations on how you respond to it. I would argue that your security budget that you had going into this, rip it up. You need to completely rethink where you're spending time and money. And for most companies, that's going to mean a focus on a few key technologies. Something called endpoint protection, or more specifically, EDR, endpoint detection and response. This is kind of the next step beyond antivirus. You really need to understand the movement of files on endpoints, especially when they're in someone's home. You're also going to want to make sure you have control over that workstation, and ideally have it to be in a corporate sanctioned workstation that they're using from home. The second thing you're going to need to really do is network segmentation. And network segmentation for most companies was something on the list of things they kind of knew they had to do, but no one really ever got around to doing it. And what that basically means is you separate certain types of data within your organization. So if a bad guy gets in, they don't get access to everything. You'd be amazed how many companies have completely flat networks. And once you come in via the VPN, you've got access to everything. Now, the VPN is also really important because a lot of VPNs terminate outside the company, or if they do terminate inside the company, you'd be amazed how few companies actually have logging on their VPN exit nodes. So what happens is, think of your internal corporate network. You're assuming that whoever comes in from the VPN is trusted. But if you don't know who has an internal IP address coming from that VPN exit node at a particular point in time, you have no idea who's conducting this activity. And most companies have no clue or how to log coming out of their VPN. So if you see activity, you have no idea if it's a good guy or a bad guy. And that's a huge problem area for most people because they just don't have their VPNs properly configured. You're going to need identity and access protection, in particular multi-factor. Let me put it this way. If you can get to corporate data and it doesn't require multi-factor authentication, that is a gigantic gaping hole right now in your defenses. It is so easy to break a password. You can break a 8, 10-digit password in a matter of minutes by brute forcing it. And it's pretty easy to do if you can come from the outside. You get access to some VPN credentials, you work your way in, you find an Active Directory, you just start pounding it with brute force password attempts, and the next thing you know, you got some admin credentials. You're also going to want to get a workstation inventory. Again, you need to know what machines are touching your network. Are they corporate sanctioned? Do they have your security stack on them? Or should they be less trusted? Now, the thing to keep in mind here, our goalpost as security professionals in this new world isn't so much to prevent people from getting in. Not that that's not an admirable goal, but it's going to be a really hard goal. So many people share passwords. You've got people coming from the outside. You probably don't have good logging on your VPN. The odds that somebody gets access to credentials is pretty good. What you've really got to do is prevent what we call lateral movement. So what you want to do is prevent the bad guy from getting in one place and then moving around from that beachhead. And it's going to be difficult to prevent a focused adversary from taking down a targeted computer. But if we can prevent them from moving laterally, then we prevent them from getting more access and elevating their credentials. The typical playbook for a bad guy: get in, find an Active Directory, and then just start pounding the crap out of it with brute force password attempts. And there's a variety of great tools. You may have heard of something called Mimikatz, for example. In a matter of hours, they've got access to your admin credentials. So look, these things are probably not on the top of the list of your security budget. And my point to you, as during COVID, you're probably compressing budgets. You can't let security fall out of that budget. So yes, we're in the midst of a public health crisis, which is creating an economic crisis, but don't let that turn into a security crisis. Okay, let's see if we've got any questions so far. No questions yet. All right. Again, if you've got a question, post in the chat forum. Go ahead.
Yeah, let me just, we have one alum here who has mentioned MITRE's attack framework. I think Jeff works for MITRE. So, but he's wondering whether or not you have any familiarity with that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, so first of all, I think, Jeff, you're bringing up a really interesting point, which is, take a look at MITRE's attack framework. And in particular, what you're looking for in this is, I'm talking, for example, about lateral movement. What you want to do is you want to break that pathway of how a bad guy is getting on your system, moving laterally and elevating credentials. And MITRE has at this point, it's really an industry standard. They've done a great job of articulating how that framework comes to bear of what an attacker uses and how you make sure you have those defenses in the right place. Now, here's the point I'm raising. When you look at that attack framework historically, because of the changes in the threat landscape and the attack surface, it is guaranteed that you need to move money and resources around, because other areas are now more important to shore up your defenses than they were when everybody was behind a corporate firewall. Okay. So,
can we jump in here? I got a couple points from Scott, who appreciates your comment about reevaluating budgets. Says a lot of customers are shrinking and not expanding, so looking to get immediate revenue impact and not long-term security needs. Do you have some thoughts on what you would say about changing that mindset with people's customers?
Well, I mean, I think, I think the key here is to realize that, and this is kind of my point, the bad guys are looking for new places to target. Don't fall victim to that, right? The last thing you need is a cybersecurity crisis in the middle of an economic crisis. And now is the time to shore up your defenses, not to let them fall down, because you've got increased adversarial activity in those industries that are still open. And you really want, but here's the other point. It isn't necessarily about spending more money. It might just be moving around the money you already have, because the vulnerabilities, the weaknesses are likely in different points. Okay.
Let me ask you one more question, Caleb.
Sure.
So, based on what you're talking about, I'm thinking back to a year ago or so. There was a lot of conversation about how the organizational IT groups were going to be getting out of the individual device business, i.e., getting your employees set up with a laptop and whatever else. They were going to say, "Hey, Mr. Employee, you go out and pick whatever you want. We're just going to hunker down and protect the network." Do you see that changing? Is there going to be more of a need for IT groups to say, we really need to have a better handle on what is actually connecting into the network?
Yeah, I mean, look, when I work a major breach, I almost universally see three failures, right? Lack of network segmentation, lack of endpoint protection, and lack of multi-factor. Any one of those three things, and you're just a lamb out in the field, right, waiting to get taken down. And the point here is you can absolutely do a bring your own device to the corporate network, but you have to put a security stack you control on that device, or you have to severely limit what that device can do. And I think the new point here is that the pathway of least resistance to get into your company isn't to go after your corporate apps. It's to go after your kids that are playing games on that shared computer at night. Use that as the beachhead to get onto that machine. Wait till you log into the VPN, grab the VPN credentials, grab the credentials into your cloud environment, and now I'm in your company, right? So what we have to realize as corporate professionals in this new world is that to ensure cyber hygiene, we all knew that we needed to take on employee education about security. But now we need to take that cyber hygiene into the home. So what's that likely going to mean? I actually care what you're using as an internet connection. I care what you're using as a home router, and I care what you're running on that workstation. Even if it's your own, I want to make sure that you've got the right hygiene in place. Look, it's analogous to COVID-19, right? If all it takes is the one person not wearing a mask and everybody gets infected, it's the same thing here. All it's going to take is the one employee at home with a really lackluster network and lack of cyber hygiene, and the next thing you know, your whole company's going down. Okay, so we should probably at least mention Zoom bombing and all the phishing targeting COVID-19 related topics. Now, just to quantify this, and this stat comes from the IBM X-Force, they had observed more than a 6,000% increase in COVID-19 related spam, with lures ranging from phishing emails impersonating the Small Business Administration and the World Health Organization to US banking institutions offering relief funds. Now, this isn't unusual, actually. It's not any different than what happens around a major sporting event like the Super Bowl, an election, or other items that make the news. Ne'er-do-wells will use that activity in the news to lure victims, and we all need to be smart about not clicking on links that just look too tempting. And of course, on Zoom bombing, well, honestly, that's just people using tools that were never meant for public forums, and frankly, weren't even meant for education for new purposes. Pretty easy to fix, but much like all of this discussion, Zoom lacked the security awareness to assess what could happen if people used it in different ways. Those things are being fixed. Publicly posting your Zoom invitation where it was easy to find, probably not a good idea. I mean, it's interesting. When all this was happening, there's a church down the street from me, and they post the Zoom link of their sermons up on a billboard in front of the church. Well, of course, anybody can join. And that's exactly what happened where we saw a lot of Zoom bombing. So in the grand scheme of things, I don't think that's a really big deal. So what is a big deal? Well, it's nation state actors targeting new targets, researchers, universities, pharma, because COVID, although not a military target, let's face it, if you're the first to identify a cure, it's going to have a gigantic economic impact. And that's something every nation wants to own. So think about the story behind the story, and again, how this changes adversarial intent and their related targeting. If your organization, if your educational institution is doing any kind of research related to COVID, you need to really lock that down because it's pretty much a guarantee somebody's targeting it. So Now let's pivot the conversation. Let's talk about the go forward. Security professionals like myself have often we've been comparing preparedness for a major cybersecurity event a lot like we've been talking about the preparedness for a pandemic. And we've been doing this for years. In fact, I'm pretty sure if you listen to my TED Talk, I probably am in there talking about how the way you think about a security incident is by building an immune system. And we've used this analogy for years to describe the multiple layers of defense and how they need to communicate with each other. And this analog worked great. Well, guess what? Now we've got a real pandemic. And I started thinking about this. Are there things we can learn from a real pandemic that we can parlay into our thinking about how we would respond to a major cybersecurity incident? And, so let's say something of significant global impact. Well, here's a couple of takeaways that I think we can learn out of our response to COVID-19 that can inform our run books and our preparedness for a major cybersecurity incident. So if we learned anything out of this pandemic, it's our reliance on the internet. A working, robust internet drives the whole economy. And under quarantine, it frankly became the lifeblood of our day-to-day lives. As social distancing and quarantines were enacted, the internet became how we procure supplies, educate our kids, how we go to work. So first and foremost, we have to think of the internet as a public resource, as the critical infrastructure to top all critical infrastructures. And man, do we need to protect it at any cost. Now, with this connected world, we also learned even inappropriate knee-jerk reactions travel around the globe with lightning speed. I mean, how many of us responded to shortages of toilet paper as an example? Shortages, misinformation, unexpected reactions, fake news. These things become global in nature, and it means that a response to an attack of global significance has to work across borders. And, although some nations are trying, it's nearly impossible to segment off or shut down portions of the internet. What happens in one country happens everywhere and happens instantly. So think about that if we were dealing with a large-scale cybersecurity incident. Imagine a NotPetya, but without a kill switch that just keeps going. And whole of nation responses, well, they really challenged how we think about incident management doctrine and coordination mechanisms. If COVID taught us anything, we need a better coordination at the federal, state, and local level. It's still not even clear who's in charge. I mean, the nightly news is pretty much politicians arguing with each other over the approach. And we've also learned that prevention is far, far cheaper and pre-established relationships far more effective than a strategy based on detection and response. So think about everything that's gone wrong with COVID, and now imagine a major cybersecurity incident. We would likely have the same challenges. So just think about what life would be like over the last few months if our corporate networks and the internet had been down. It would definitely be far worse, probably catastrophic. So what does this mean in terms of how we need to think differently as individuals, as companies, as governments coming out the other side of this? Well, communication, coordination, and command is required, and at all levels. And it has to be established before a major incident occurs. And here's the thing with a major cybersecurity incident, it's not just state, local, and federal resources. They need to work off of one playbook, but they've got to be tightly connected to the cybersecurity industry, which they're largely not today. There's no good pathway today for government to engage the private sector to help with a response to a major cyber event. Much like the call to make masks and ventilators, what happens if the government needs assistance from private sector security companies? Have those pathways been built? Absolutely not. Have they been tested at scale? Absolutely not. Who's in charge? Not a clue. And, recovery capacity needs to be built. Let's not forget, we're in a market with over 2 million unfilled cybersecurity jobs globally, 300,000 of which are here in the United States. We have to build the education pipeline to shore up this problem. And lastly, in this, we've got to counter disinformation. You know, the internet's such a great tool. It can spread both good and evil, and it can do it quickly. So look, the net of this, to summarize it all, is I want you to realize we have a new one. How you thought about information security historically has got to change. And ultimately, that's got to be grounded in understanding of the attacker, their campaigns and their motivations, and what's changed there. So with that, let me kind of wrap up the formal presentation, and happy to take some more questions.
Yeah, if anyone has some more questions for Caleb, just go ahead and enter them in the chat box. I think your comment about the interaction between government entities and private entities is a pretty interesting one, and I'll give you an example that I personally and several other people in our world right now have experienced. There's been a massive hack into the unemployment insurance system, in that there's a bazillion fraud claims being done because you can enter your unemployment insurance claim online. There's no proof of who it is that's actually entering it. And the proof, the information that needs to be entered to file the claim, is, in the interest of the filers, as easy as possible to get. So we've seen huge numbers of unemployment claims being made that are fraudulent. Right now, all of this seems to be happening in an online space, because nobody's going to the unemployment office to fill this out. But the environment seems to be that they're approaching it initially as an individual law enforcement issue, not as a systemic security issue.
Yeah. Well, and we have to remember a couple of key things, right? So this goes back to the whole point of actor campaign and motivation. If I can't break into your bank or your educational institution or your travel site because it's not as busy right now and it's not going to be as lucrative, well, where's the money going? Oh, it's going to unemployment. So let me go tap into that. You know, I think we probably saw the same thing with a lot of those small business administration loans. And, you know, what was interesting actually on the SBA loans is that they required you work with a bank where you had a pre-existing, or you set up a relationship. I mean, there was some thought put into that. And I think, to your point, we have to think through these mechanisms in their holistic form of how do we root out fraud and crime anytime we set up a process, but certainly anytime we do something in a hurry.
Yep. So got a question from David. What are your thoughts on a zero trust initiative, something like what Google and Microsoft has done? He says his concerns are around whether those policies are realistic to maintain in any company that might have legacy products that are difficult to update.
You know, I actually am a big proponent of zero trust. And the basic idea of zero trust is that no one is trusted by default, whether they're coming from the inside or the outside, until some sort of verification occurs. And here's the reason why I really like zero trust. It's not even the surface of just don't trust anything. What I really like about it is it forces you to segment your data. It forces you to say, who should actually have access to this particular data element? And what level of authentication is required for them to get access to that? I think that's just a very smart discipline. Now, the problem you raise is legacy products. Well, guess what? I mean, the way you've got to look at it is if you've got old data that is valuable and you can't protect it or segment it, then the odds are somebody's probably going to get a hold of it at some point. Now, the other thing that I think goes hand in hand with zero trust is what's your policy on getting rid of data? I mean, it's funny, over the last 5 to 10 years, companies just started gathering as much as they could, all kinds of analytics, as much customer data as they need. I would actually argue that you need to look at your data from two lenses. What is the business value of the data? But also you need to look at it as a security professional and consider that data that you're storing is nuclear. It's like a nuclear asset, particularly anything that's PII or PHI. Do you really need that data? You know, do you really need to keep it? It was interesting as I stepped into my most recent role, you know, my poor chief information security officer, he's got a CEO that is a security professional. So you can imagine a few of our first conversations, I'm walking through everything, kind of inspecting, all right, how you handling this? How you handling this? Looking for problems. And it was funny. One of the biggest things that I did in the first month of coming into this role is just massive purges of data. Because I went through all of our data stores and asked the question, why do we need this? Oh, okay, this is data on a customer that's no longer a customer anymore. How long do we legally need to keep that data? And as soon as we don't need it, get rid of it. I mean, that's one of the other key things that goes with this is your data helping you, or is it just a nuclear asset that you're running the risk of it getting stolen sometime down the road?
Okay. So one more thought for you. And if everyone will please forgive me an opportunity to make a little plug for RIT's cybersecurity environment. So two-part question, Caleb. Thinking from an educational perspective, what should cybersecurity programs really be looking at training and educating students on going forward? And on the flip side of that, as you know, we have a pretty healthy research initiative going on. And are the research initiatives more important to be focusing on the people aspect of cybersecurity or on the technical aspect?
Oh, now that's a very good question. If I look at who the strongest people are that I've worked with in the cybersecurity space, a lot of them did not come from traditional engineering disciplines like I did myself. A lot of them came from investigative backgrounds. They were FBI agents, police officers, military beforehand, various types of, banking investigators. One of the things you really need in this space, especially if you're going to be doing any form of threat hunting or research, you've got to understand the human dynamics, the motivations people have. I mean, it's funny. Every time I sit down with a CEO in this space that has been impacted by a major breach, probably the biggest thing they struggle with is realizing that they're up against a human adversary. And that person on the other end can see their response. They can pivot, they can jog. There isn't a framework or a set of rules that the adversary is following. They're just doing whatever's to their advantage. And that's a really hard thing for corporate executives to realize, that you're getting punched in the face and you're going to keep getting punched in the face until you learn how to punch back. And that's a skill that's not in traditional engineering disciplines or traditionally thought about in research, bringing that human dynamic into it. And I think that's something that we can really step up our capabilities on, along with, frankly, presentation skills. Because the other challenge with security is, good security doesn't do any good if you can't explain it to your executive team, to your peers, to your company. Remind me again your first question.
Which I think you're getting into as well is the idea of what the education today should be focused on for our students.
All right, so I'm going to give you two plugs for anyone out there that's got a college-age student to think about. All right, first of all is something called CyberCore. This is the most little-known, coolest government initiative out there, and basically the deal is, included, and RIT is actually a CyberCore school.
Yes,
if you sign up for them, you go and get your cybersecurity degree, and basically the U.S. government pays for it. And the trade-off is, I think it's, don't quote me on this, but I think it's like 2 years of government service, non-military. So this is like FBI, Homeland Security, Department of Agriculture, or whatever, doing security work. Now, what I love about this is two things, not only the financial implications, but the skill you're going to learn in 2 years in government. You're going to get to see things and do things that you'd never get to do in the private sector. And the argument that I would make to people is you're going to be worth 3 times your peers when you come out of that 2 years of service, and you're going to save a whole lot of money on school. That's the first thing. The second thing to look at is there's a major initiative underway, also government related, regarding procurement into the U.S. military. So the U.S. military today has 300,000 military contractors. They estimate they're losing about $6 billion a year in intellectual property theft to adversaries through on the unclassified but sensitive side of the equation. So we're not talking about the Lockheeds and the Raytheons of the world. We're talking about the smaller companies that make a part that might end up in a military aircraft. It's not necessarily classified, but it's highly sensitive. Those companies historically had to do their own security assessments with self-attestation. That's changing this year. They're going to have to move to a third-party assessment, and all 300,000 of them have to get assessed. Well, it's going to take 10,000 assessors to be able to ramp up to do this level of assessment work and collaborate. You know, this isn't like an audit, it kind of is, but it's really more collaborative working with these companies. That's a whole new workforce that doesn't exist, and it's coming online now. So I think that's the other area that educational institutions as well as individuals can really ramp up for, and it's going to be a whole new economy.
Yeah, that's wild. So David's got a good comment here, which I'll read to you, but we're thinking on the same lane, because the other question I was going to ask you was about artificial intelligence in the hacking environment. So he says your comments about shifting to a work from home scenario reminded him of a talk that he heard from Microsoft where they explained that they can onboard a new employee with a new company device for the first time on the public internet. He says his personal experience so far, combining zero trust with machine learning and AI, companies have a terrible balance of maintaining PII. I'm sorry, maybe you can define that for us. PII with, quote, data is king for AI. He said he just thought that was relevant to purging unnecessary data.
Well, David, I think you're spot on. And PII is personally identifiable information. Here's the point, David. You know, not only do I totally agree with you, but where it gets worse is all of the companies that don't have a zero trust initiative did the same damn thing during COVID. And they basically said, hey, you had a workstation at work, you don't have a laptop. If you have a computer at home, great. Connected to the corporate internet, let's get back to work. Okay. Well, how old was that machine? Has it been patched? What else is installed on it? Is it a shared workstation? Is there any security stack on it? The answer to all those questions is no. Now it's, you know, and we had to do that. Look, companies had to move fast. Well, that crisis part of this is over. Everybody's working. Now is the time to go back and clean up that mess that we all created.
All right. Well, Caleb, thanks so much for bringing this up to us. I think there's just some fascinating things going on right now, not just in terms of what we're looking at in the future, but a look back at what it is we've learned from this global crisis. So we really appreciate you bringing this topic up to us. If anyone has any additional questions, you can email them to ritalum@rit.edu, and we'll direct your questions to Caleb. And also note that we did put Caleb's YouTube link and some other of his contacts in the chat box. So please feel free to go and visit those, and you can certainly contact him directly if you have some additional questions. You can also see a full listing of our upcoming events, like today's webinar. You will find it at rit.edu/alumni/events. We have several opportunities coming up over the next few weeks, and we'd like to include you in as many as possible. And as I mentioned at the beginning, everyone will receive an email from us in about a week with a link to today's webinar recording, so you can check back and learn some more as you listen again. Please go ahead and feel free to exit the webinar by closing your browser window and let us know what you thought through a brief survey that you are going to receive via email. Have a wonderful week, and everyone, please stay safe.
Thank you.